Hello and welcome to this Polymesh video tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to go through the process of changing your primary key associated with your Polymesh account. And along the way, I'll also talk about adding and removing secondary keys from your account. But before I get into the detail of that, I just want to briefly touch on why we're doing this. Polymesh is unique in that identity is one of the key pillars. On-chain identity is built into Polymesh. Everyone who uses Polymesh must have gone through an onboarding process, including a KYC, and have an on-chain identity. And it's this on-chain identity that we are going to be associating these keys with, adding, removing, swapping out keys in this tutorial. So in my wallet, I currently have three keys that we're going to use for this demonstration. I have a Testnet 1, Testnet 2, and Testnet 3, and we're going to be using the Polymesh Testnet. But everything that I'm showing you here will be exactly the same on Mainnet, apart from some of the links that you visit will be different. So let's first of all load the Polymesh dashboard. When we first come to this, you'll have to authorize the dApp to connect to your wallet. So you'll accept that authorization in your wallet. You'll get a pop-up and we'll enter the dashboard. Once the dashboard loads, we're going to go to the account tab. In the tab, we can see that we currently have one key associated with our DID, primary key in this case, Testnet 1. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to change that primary key to another key. In my wallet, I currently have three keys, Testnet 1, Testnet 2, and Testnet 3. Both Testnet 2 and Testnet 3 are currently unassigned. They're not associated with any DID. They cannot send PolyX, they cannot receive PolyX. So we want to change Testnet 1 to our primary key, and we want to make Testnet 2 our new primary key. But before we do that, there's an important step that we need to consider here. In the process, when we change Testnet 1 to make Testnet 2 our primary key, that key gets disassociated with our identity. So it currently has PolyX tokens. Testnet 2 doesn't have any PolyX tokens. If we swap them so that Testnet 1 is now unassigned and Testnet 2 becomes assigned, our assigned key with our DID now has no PolyX tokens in it, and it won't be able to transact. So we need to get some tokens into Testnet 2 before we make it our primary key. So in order to do that, we're going to join Testnet 2 to our identity. And to do that, we're going to use this assign a key button. So we'll enter a nickname for it. We call it T2 in this case. We'll copy our address from our wallet, enter it, assign the key, confirm. We'll sign the transaction. So we're going to add authorization. In this case, we're calling the join identity extrinsic to add to this account. Sign that. Transaction's in process. And that transaction is completed successfully. So joining a key to your account is a two-step process. You have to make an initial request from your primary key, and then you also need to accept it from the other key. This is to prevent you from just assigning, joining any key to your identity. The person who controls the second key also has to accept that to confirm that they want to join your identity. So in order to do that, we're going to select Testnet key 2. The dashboard will refresh and will provide us some context menus relative to the second key. In this case, we now see a banner at the top. Key request, another user, this is my DID, has requested to assign your key to their Polymesh account. Please accept if you wish to sign on their behalf. So it's important if you do get a banner like this that you just double check that this is your DID that you're joining to. So it's correct in this case, so we're going to accept this, confirm. We're going to sign this transaction. In this case, we're joining identity. There's a transaction fee of 0.119 polyx. However, in this case, our Testnet2 account has no polyx to sign this. However, in the case of join identity authorization, the primary key actually pays the fee. So when you sign this to accept it, you'll now join identity, but your primary key pays the fee to complete that transaction. Once that is successful, the dashboard will refresh. And we now have Testnet1 and Testnet2 both associated with our DID. At this point, we're going to switch back to Testnet1 as our active account. So you can see in our wallet, both of them are now grouped under the same DID, and only Testnet3 is marked as unassigned. Clicking on Testnet1 again causes the dashboard to refresh. And this time we're going to go back to the Overview tab, and we're going to send some tokens to Testnet2. So let's copy the address from our wallet again. We're not going to include a memo in this case, and we're going to send 1000 polyx tokens, test tokens in this case. We'll review the transaction, confirm. Again, review the transaction, sign, and wait for the transaction to complete. And that's successfully complete. Next, we're going to switch back to our Accounts tab, where we can see Testnet1 and Testnet2, and Testnet2 now has some polyx in it. We're going to unassign Testnet2 because we want to swap Testnet1 and Testnet2, so we're going to make Testnet2 our primary. But you cannot make a key that is already associated with another DID a primary key. So to get around that, we're going to have to remove this key. So you can use this key icon here to unassign the key. We're going to unassign it, confirm. Again, we sign a transaction. So we're going to remove a secondary key in this case, and this is the key, the address for Testnet2. We sign and confirm that. Again, we see details of the transaction in progress, and we just wait for that to complete. Once that's complete, the secondary key is now gone. We can look in our wallet. We now have Testnet1 only under our DID. Testnet2 is unassigned. It has some polyx associated with it, but you will not be able to send those tokens because it's not associated with your ID. So for the next part of the tutorial, we're going to move away from the Polymesh dashboard. We're going to move to an instance of the Polka.js dedicated for Polymesh, for the testnet in this case. So we're going to go to testnet-app.polymesh.live. On this site, we go to the Developer tab and Extrinsics. We're going to make Testnet1 our active wallet. We're going to select the Identity palette. The Identity palette, as we were talking about, DIDs, keys, rotation, etc. And the extrinsic we're going to call is add authorization. We're going to add authorization for account. Testnet2 is the account that we're going to give authorization. And the function that we're going to call is rotate primary key. Once that's all completed in the form, You have an option here to set an expiry for this authorization request. We're going to just leave that as empty. Submit the transaction, sign, again confirm in your wallet, and that's transaction has been successful. Again, the rotating of a key is a two-stage process. So we've made a request, but Testnet 2 key now has to accept that. So if we look in our wallet, we still show Testnet 1 as our primary and Testnet 2 is our secondary. So in order to do that, we're going to have to, again, we're going to change the context here. Testnet 2 is going to be our requesting key. Identity is what we're going to call again here. And we're going to scroll down and find the accept primary key. In this case, we need to fill in authorization ID. So in the previous transaction, we created an authorization. There's an authorization ID associated with that. So we now need to find that authorization ID and input it here to accept that request. So to do that, we're going to go to our Blockchain Explorer subscan. In this case, for the testnet, we have polymesh-testnet.subscan. I also have some links here for the equivalent sites for Mainnet shown for reference. We're going to copy our primary key address and we're going to search for that. Under that address, we can see a list of different extrinsics that we have completed with this account. And you can see the most recent one here, identity add authorization. And this was to rotate a primary key. So if we click on this extrinsic, we can see more details. And there are some events associated with this. So identity authorization added, if we expand that out and look at the details, we can see here the details of our authorization ID. So authorization ID 956. So that's the number we want to copy. Take it back to our apps screen and we'll paste it into the form. Submitting the transaction, we'll signing from the secondary key. Again, in this case, the primary key pays the fee because they made the authorization request, even though we do have PolyX in our secondary key in this case. So we'll sign, and that has been complete. Now when we look at our wallet, Testnet 2 is our primary, and Testnet 1 is unassigned. So it may be that you wanted to remove all those tokens from Testnet 1. Now that it's paid all its fees, it's safe to join that back on. You can transfer tokens out of that or you can keep it as a secondary key. So let's go back and just add that as a secondary key. So we go back to our dashboard. We'll make sure that Testnet 2 is our primary, is our selected key, our active key. And this time it's showing Testnet 2 as our primary key. Our DID hasn't changed, but our primary key has changed. We'll assign a key. We'll call this T1. We'll paste in our Testnet 1 key. Assign it. Confirm. Sign the transaction. Switch to Testnet 1. And again, accept that authorization so that we join Testnet 1 back as a secondary key to our DID. add back a UID to our key that we've just added. Accept it. And now when we go to the Accounts tab, we can see Testnet2 is our primary key, Testnet1 is our secondary key, and we can now transfer that poly. Both of them can operate, but now Testnet2 is the one with the primary key permissions. Testnet2 has the permissions associated with that specific secondary key. So that concludes this tutorial. So just as a recap, what we did is we swapped our primary and our secondary key in this case. But before we did that, we had to ensure that we had a way to get PolyX tokens into Testnet2 after it became our primary key. The way that we did it in this example is that we first joined it to our identity, then removed it, and then we rotated the primary and secondary keys. An alternative approach may be that if you had 3 accounts, that prior to removing and Testnet2 was unassigned. If you had 2 assigned accounts, let's say we had Testnet1 and Testnet3, both assigned, both containing PolyX, you could have just called the rotate primary key authorization directly. In that case, it would unlink Testnet1, join Testnet2, but if you have PolyX in Testnet3, which is already associated with your account as a secondary key, you can send that to Testnet2, and then you would be able to add Testnet1 back in because you have some PolyX, which would allow you to transact. So it may just depend on your situation. If you have another key already associated with it, you can avoid that original step that we went through of adding Testnet2 as a secondary key and then only to remove it later after transferring PolyX to it. So I hope you found this tutorial useful. Just again for reference, some of the links that we followed along the way. I was doing this tutorial using the Polymesh testnet. The links are shown there, but the equivalent sites for Polymesh Mainnet are also shown below just for reference. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Hopefully you found it useful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And hopefully I'll be able to create some more content which will educate people about how to use Polymesh in the near future.